What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 452. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, the Mile High City, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how was the sandwich, buddy?
It was excellent.
We both actually partook of great sandwiches pre-show. So
yeah, well, you got to be fueled, in order to bring the listeners our best.
I feel like the listeners can expect a lot. Like properly sandwich up LR co-host is like a pretty good place to be. We're going to be going over the M19 Archetype breakdown for this one, as well as going over a few overrated, underrated, or properly rated cards at the end, just to kind of get a little bit of a test. But this is the show where we really do a deep dive on the archetype, so that you'll understand if there's one perhaps that you haven't experimented with or tried out, or if you just want to tweak your take on them. You'll have a lot more information about that before the next time you sit down to draft. Before we get into that, I got to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for everything you need magic related on ye old internet. You can find basically anything there. Sealed product, singles, supplies, all the stuff that you need to make magic go. And Luis, it was really funny. I did a video with Brian David Marshall for my MCG Breakdown channel about a tournament that took place in 1994. And one of the things that really stood out is that there's like no supplies. Like there's no sleeves. There's no proper deck boxes. There's dice. And you remember those glass bead things?
Oh, yes, I certainly do.
Yeah, and they like there was one dude in the video using those to track his life total.
Yep.
He's like, I take 3 beads away from the pile. It's like, what the hell?
I remember people using those to indicate whether something was tapped or not. They wouldn't tap their cards. They would just put a bead on.
Oh, my God. Yeah. So, you've got that kind of stuff way back in the day. But now there's a whole market around supplies for Magic. Mainly sleeves and deck boxes with dice are kind of the main stuff. But there's life counters and toys and all this other stuff. Playmats, of course. Right, of course. Playmats are huge for that as well. And you can get all of those at channelfireball.com and all different types of cool designs and stuff. It's really kind of become a self-expression. It's like, oh, I'm all about dragons.
I don't think we sell those little glass beads, though. I think you'll have to look elsewhere.
Thankfully, those have gone the way of a lot of things in 1994 and are now gone. But yes, channelfireball.com. And while you're there, make sure you check out all the awesome free content right on the front of the website. Also, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources, where you can get a bunch of cool bonuses. And we want to thank each and every one of you for supporting the show. It, of course, means a lot to us that you do so. And if you're interested in it, patreon.com/limited resources, where you want to go. One thing you can do as well while you're there, if you're a patron, you get access to the Patreon feed, and that gives you access to a bunch of kind of behind the scenes cool stuff. And one of them is you get to submit questions for the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Mark, who says, hey, Marshall, what do you think of Ben S. pushing for a limited Pro Tour? I think as limited specialists, we'd like it, but for Magic and Wizards as a whole, it may limit marketing to the latest set for Constructed, since everyone wants to see the pros break a format. What are your opinions? So this is interesting because this is also a topic, Luis, that came up on Twitter extensively this week about whether there should be limited at the Pro Tour at all, which is, of course, a whole nother question, but is related to this one from Mark. And I thought we should probably, I wanted to actually talk about both of those things because I think it's an important topic. And when it comes to the Mark's question, an all limited Pro Tour, as a fan and viewer, and even as a commentator in the booth, I would love it. I mean, this used to happen, right? Like, didn't Finkel win? Wasn't the last one that Finkel won an all limited Pro Tour?
Yeah, that was a Pro Tour Kuala Lumpur. The first Pro Tour I ever played was all limited. It was just straight up 5 drafts. You have to go 4-2 in your first 2 drafts to make day 2. Then there's three drafts on day 2, and that cuts to a top 8. Yeah, as a player, I love them. I would certainly be overjoyed if an all limited Pro Tour came back. As someone on the other side of things, like in terms of content or coverage, it's a lot dicier. Limited is less popular, though I do think that could potentially be ameliorated by covering limited in a different way. I think that there's definitely room for improvement as to how limited gets covered, but I still think you're going to have a harder time because coverage just has constructed just has these pretty easy narratives of like, here's the deck. We can explain exactly what the deck's trying to do, and you can make this deck and play this deck yourself. Limited doesn't really have that connection, so it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, I would, to be clear, while I really like the idea of an all limited Pro Tour, and maybe as a special event it would be cool, I actually would not do that if it were my decision. I think Constructed is an incredibly important part of the Pro Tour experience, and I love the balance in competition between needing to understand the draft format, but also having to work on a deck. I like challenging the pros and really seeing what they come up with in like a shorter time frame. I like it to be difficult for you guys, Luis. I know that might make your workload harder, but it's so much more interesting as a viewer to see who can really come to the top. And I think it really challenges the skill set. So I like the split format. And then as you mentioned, I mean, Constructed from a viewership perspective is so much higher. Like it's, I don't know, just anecdotally, like 4 times the viewers on average or something. If we did a, let's say the peak, which is modern, that's the most popular, did a modern GP versus a limited GP, I would expect like 3 or 4 times the viewership for the modern one. Like it's that big of a difference. People love watching Constructed. So I think that's great. When it comes to the question of should we get rid of limited at the Pro Tour entirely? Well, I'm against it on both sides of this coin. First, just as a fan and viewer and commentator, no, I love limited. It's the part that's most fascinating to me, and I would hate to see it go. And I know that there is a relatively large and dedicated group of people that also are obsessed with limited, like you and I, Luis, and all of our listeners, that would be extremely disappointed to see that go. But even from a would I make this decision if it were mine mode, I would think no. I mean, I don't have access to any numbers or anything, but the Pro Tour is really designed in, its function is in many ways to up the bar, right? It's to give people something to shoot for at the tournament level, but it's also to generate demand. And one of the ways that it generates demand is from Constructed by making certain cards more popular and therefore more desirable, which forces people to open packs. But also, I think that just watching people play limited goes, oh, I could do that. And limited remains, in my mind, one of the best ways to get into Magic. Like once you know the rules of it, you sit down and you go play some sealeds or even jump into a draft or two, and you're doing 2 things. You're learning how to play and you're honing the entire skill set of a Magic player with regards to selecting the cards you're going to put in your deck, building it, getting the mana right, all that kind of stuff. But on top of that, you're also building your collection. And I know a lot of people build their collections from drafting, where they accumulate cards by playing and learning, and then eventually they'll turn those into constructed decks or parts of their constructed deck. And I think that, there is a big push somehow for opening more booster packs by putting limited on the Pro Tour. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of the name of the game if I'm in charge. So I don't think I would get rid of it entirely. I don't think that viewership is the only metric that matters when it comes to the Pro Tour.
I think it's a little short-sighted to say that viewership's all that matters. But on the other hand, it does also matter to some degree. So
right.
I'm not sure what I would do if I were in charge of everything, but certainly as a player, I would like to see an all-limited Pro Tour.
Yeah, I would like to see it. Maybe just as a special thing. All right, this pack comes from Andy Tillman. Thank you very much, Andy. And this is our crack pack for M19 for the week. All right, what do we got? Right out of the gates, we've got Cancel.
Well, certainly more playable in this format than it normally is, but not a card I want to first pick.
Right. Hostile Minotaur.
This is decent. 3/3 haste for 4. That lets you, put a decent amount of pressure on your opponent. But again, between this and the 4/3 Devils, you're not really lacking for 4 drops.
Right. Easy to find in red. Knight's Pledge, 1 and a white enchant creature. Enchant creature gets +2/+2. Been really unimpressed by Knight's Pledge. I've had people go all in on, some
Falcon.
Rust-Wing Falcon or whatever. Yeah, and it's fine. Like it can get in for some damage, but the removal is fine enough, I think, in this set that isn't just like game winning like it has been in some scenarios where if you want to take that high variance strategy, you can really force your opponent to have certain cards early in the game. And while that is true here, I just don't see people ride Knight's Pledge to the win very often, so I'm pretty down on it.
Yeah, I think the card is quite bad.
Yeah. Here's the big Knight's Pledge, Oaken form.
Not a big fan of Oaken form either. I think that there's just enough ways to deal with these enchanted creatures that I'd rather not put all my eggs in one basket. And unless you get like a Vine Mare, you're not really getting hexproof creatures either.
Yeah. Well, also weird that it's green, right? Like it's already making these really big creatures, and you're like, you know what I need? More power and toughness. Epicure of Blood is next. Guy's been good 4 and a black 4/4, and whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. He's a vampire.
Card's fine. I would not want to first pick it. It's more of a
God, no.
Slightly above average filler than it is a card I really want to take early.
Yeah, it's the card I would take here, but boy, this pack has been bad so far, and it ain't getting better. Crash Through, no. Even Wind Mage kind of goes with Crash Through, I guess. Cards actually disappointed me a bit. 2 and a blue, 2/2 flyer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, he gets +1/+1 until on the turn. It's fine. I have it at C-, D+ after even after having played with it a bunch.
Yeah, it turns out there's just not that much support for it. So even though it's a good rate card in and of itself, without a lot of good spells or a deck, like a really pushed spells deck, it's just going to be fine. I don't think it's bad, but I just don't think it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. I just thought it would be like a C+. I thought it was going to be Windrake with upside, and it just feels like it doesn't really quite have a home. Blue-white's the only deck I really like it in. Cavalry Drillmaster. This one's actually kind of gone up and down for me. I'm not really sure where I'm at. 1 and a white, 2/1, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+1 first.
I will say I lose a lot to this card in the red-white deck.
Yeah,
it's just does a really good job of pushing through like 4 or 5 damage that you kind of weren't expecting.
Yeah, and then it leaves behind like a very mediocre body, but it is a body, and that's something quite good in that red-white deck. We'll talk about that one in just a little bit, of course. Spark Tongue Dragon, 3 red, 3/3 flyer. You can, it doesn't say it, but this is just kicker, right? You can kick it for 2 and a red and do 3 damage to something.
Yeah, it's slightly different because if you put it into play with something like War Eyes from the Grave, you do actually get the opportunity to kick it. But still,
sure.
It is basically the same thing. I like Spark Tongue Dragon. I wouldn't mind starting with a Sparky here. It's expensive, but it's good in the ramp/control decks.
Boy, I just took a look at our uncommons. You will not be picking Spark Tongue Dragon out of this pack. Next we got some heat. Vinemare, start things off.
Well, yeah, the 5/3 hexproof for 2 green, and then it can't be blocked by black creatures. Mm-hmm. This card is quite good. It's a big enough creature by itself that you don't actually need to put an aura on it to have it be a threat. And sometimes it just randomly can't get blocked by their squad. So Vinemare is very, very good.
Yeah, that'd certainly be my pick at the moment. Next card's good too, though, and got a little soft spot in my heart as well. Exclusion Mage, the Mana War set. It's about as close as you're going to get to Mana War too, yeah.
Well, it is just a Mana War. Can't bounce your own creatures, which is unfortunate.
It's also not. It's also an inferior creature type.
Yes, it's not a jellyfish. It's a 2 and a blue for a 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield bounces on a creature an opponent controls. And yeah, this card's really good. I think I would actually, I think I would probably take the Vinemare, but I do like Exclusion Mage.
Yeah, it's close between those two. We'll see. Now, the next one's a pretty good one, too. It's Siegebreaker Giant. 3 red for a 6/3 Trampler, and you can pay 3 and a red to have target creature not be able to block this turn.
This card has not impressed me. It's lower than I initially thought. I thought that this would be a pretty good high-end threat for red decks, and it still does a fine job of doing that, but I almost never prioritize it just because 3 toughness is just so little.
It went down for me. We had it at B in the set review. Like, I thought it was going to be really, really good, but it ended up being a little bit lower than that.
Yeah, I think I had it about that in a written review, and I think I would probably kick it down to about a C+ now, maybe even just a C. I don't know. It seems pretty replaceable.
Yeah, it's just fine. Like, I like these other two. All right, we got a lot of cards in this pack. So we got a Forsaken Sanctuary, the white-black tap dual land in our basic land slot, and we also got a foil. It's Anticipate.
All right. I like the card, but I'm not taking it over any of the good action that we've got in uncommon here.
Oh, baby. We got a nice rare, too. Oh, my goodness. Now you got some. So right now it's between Vinemare and Exclusion Mage.
Right.
Can I interest you in Vivictus Asmati the Dire?
All right. So this is 3 red, black, green for a 6/6 flying. Does it trample?
No.
It does not, right? Okay. So 6/6 flyer. And when it attacks, each player, you choose a permanent controlled by each player, and those players sacrifice those permanents and put the top card of their deck into play if it's a permanent.
Yes, that's exact. Wow. Nice. Well done, dude. That is what it is. Yeah.
So this card has 2 big advantages. One, it downgrades whatever their best permanent is into usually something worse. Two, the bigger part is it lets you sacrifice one of your own lands to flip over your top card of your deck. Yep. So you end up getting a pretty big swing out of this most of the time.
Now it
would just take
gold, though, right?
Yeah, and 3 colors, like not even just gold. I would take Vivictus Asmati. I think that being able to, from pick 1, draft around that, I mean, the power level is just so much higher than anything else going on here. So I think that it's worth, in this format, taking Elder Dragons when you open them. That's pretty good practice. Maybe not Arcades.
No, and one of the things that's really nice about the two big ones, this one and Palladiumors, is that they both have green in their casting cost, which, as you mentioned, when you get out ahead of that a little bit and you're like, okay, pack 1, pick 1, I got Palladiumors, or pack 1, pick 1, I got Vivictus Asmati, you can keep your eye out for, some of the key mana fixing type cards like Gift of Paradise. And that really helps you not only get to the number of mana, but also get that additional color in your deck or on the battlefield so that you can actually cast these things. And I agree. I'm just windmill sliming Vivictus Asmati. The card is extraordinarily difficult to deal with. And if it starts to attack, the game just snowballs in your favor quite quickly. And all of this is on top of a 6/6 flyer for 6, which if you cast in any reasonable time frame is also going to kind of dominate the board. So I'm definitely in for Vivictus, though this is a really strong pack, man. Vine Mare and an Exclusion Mage in there as well. Also, nice. We get to put a foil Anticipate and a Vivictus Asmati in our giveaway pool for the next time that we give those away to one of our lucky patrons. Of course, we keep all the rares from our Cracker Packs and send them out periodically to our patrons. If you want to be eligible for that, all you have to do is be a patron. That's it. Okay, let's get into this stuff, Luis. We've got our archetype breakdown. Now, I had to kind of draw the line somewhere because I wanted to avoid a situation where we fully broke down an archetype that we don't like, right? Like the one that you and I talked about before the show was the green-white enchantments deck. And like, I don't think that's a good deck. And I didn't want to like do some big breakdown on it and then go, oh, and by the way, don't draft this. So if it didn't make the list, it doesn't necessarily mean it's terrible. It just means it hasn't stood out as one of the better archetypes for Luis and I in our drafts.
Right. Like, so like to use green-white as the example, if all the pieces are there and it's wide open, sure, you can draft it and it's going to be good. But it doesn't come together as nearly as regularly as something like black-white or red-white. So don't see that we left something off and feel like it's undraftable, but we did leave it off for a reason.
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, if the colors are open, I don't think that there's an undraftable color pair in this set.
No, there's not. I mean,
I don't think there's a single color pair that I would just say I'm not doing that under any circumstance. Right.
No, I mean, I think green white's near the bottom, but for the most part, I think that if the colors are flowing, then you can be in any combination.
Right. All right. So let's start things off with the deck that comes to mind to me when I think of M19, simply because it's the most pushed archetype, because there's this discussion about, raw card power, right? Just if you have a bunch of uncommons and stuff, gold cards or whatever in your color pair versus these synergistic decks that they did make available, though didn't really support in M19. This is still a core set. And I think they didn't want to go all in with like trying to make people figure out the subtleties of these, different types of archetypes. So instead they just said, well, we'll throw a little bit at you. But the one they threw the most at was Black-White Life Gain. And that's the one that has the most cards that say blah, blah, blah gains life. There's actually a ton of it in M19. And it's maybe the most obvious deck in M19. Just, you could kind of see it before you even got the cards in your hand to play. And they basically break down the cards into 2 categories. There's enablers, which is the cards that gain you life. And then there's the payoffs, which give you a bonus for gaining life. The enablers themselves break down into 2 different categories. And this is all under the commons, our key common section. So I'm not including the uncommons or the rares, which there's actually numbers of those in there as well. But they break down into cards that you can use as a repeat enabler or one-time enabler. So you can gain life like once when you cast a card or whatever, or the ones that, allow you to do it over and over. As usual, the repeat ones tend to be better in a deck like this, but there's not a ton. So the repeat enablers are a Johnny's Welcome, which is a card that I have only seen and only played in the most extreme versions of this deck. I generally don't want it. It's white for an enchantment. And by the way, I made a mistake. This is actually an uncommon. But
yeah, I was going to say, but
yeah. But whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life.
So this is the kind of card. It reminds me of the go-to example I have is Ghoul Caller's Bell back in Innistrad, where when your opponent plays Ghoul Caller's Bell, or in this case, Ajani's Welcome on turn 1, it either means that you're about to beat the crap out of them because they're just playing bad cards in their deck, or you're in trouble because these cards are good in the right deck, and most of the people who can identify that and draft that deck tend to know what they're doing. So I think for the most part, Ajani's Welcome is not good. Like, you should probably not play this card 9 times out of 10. But if you have enough Ajani's Pridemates and Regal Bloodlords, then all of a sudden Ajani's Welcome gets kind of interesting. So
it really does.
It's a really swingy card.
Obviously a bad top deck as well. Other repeat enablers, and I'm a little loose with this one, is Daybreak Chaplain, the 1/3 lifelink for 2. What I mean by repeat in this case is that sometimes you'll get a few, but it's usually not a thing that you can do every time, because the most important one at common is Vampire Neonate. That's the black 0/3, and you can pay a couple mana, tap it, and drain your opponent. That, for one, that guy is that's kind of the focal point as far as the repeat enablers at common go. And it's the one that you can basically try to set up to do every turn. The one-time use enablers are a little bit different. Cards like Dwarven Priest, the 2/4 for 3 and a white that gains you life equal to the number of creatures you control when ATBs. Like, that's a one shot. Invoke the Divine if you have it in your deck. Revitalize, 1 and a white, gain 3 life, draw a card. Lich's Caress. This one's obviously fantastic because it's doing something that you really want to do anyway, but also giving you not only a significant amount of life, but just that life gain hit for this type of deck. On the other end of that, go ahead.
How many payoffs would you need before you put Lich's Caress in your deck?
the big fat 0. Now, the next card, though, that number changes a lot. And I don't think I've actually hit the number of payoffs needed to play this card. It's Sovereign's Bite. It's 1 and a black sorcery. Common, target player loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. It's funny. I would need 0 for Lich's Caress, but I actually don't know if there's a number that I could even have. I think Sovereign's Bite is just terrible. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, I've died to it, but it's not a card I would recommend playing.
No, and then Skymarch Bloodletter, which is another very solid one-time enabler, probably the second best one on the list. The 2 and a black 2/2 flyer, and it drains your opponent for 1 when it enters the battlefield. Those are the ones to me that are really, really solid. Now, here's where things get kind of interesting, though. When it comes to payoffs, there's actually very few. Ajani's Pridemate, which you mentioned, is one of them, and it's one of the best ones. Epicure of Blood, which we had in our Crack-a-Pack, the 5-drop 4/4 that makes him lose life whenever you gain life. That rewards you for those repeat effects or maybe a few extra hits from a Bloodletter or whatever. And then Regal Bloodlorded Uncommon, the 2/4 flyer for 3 black white. And whenever you gain life, or if you've gained life this turn on your end step, you get a 1/1 flying bat, which is a really good payoff. The other one that you have to kind of stretch the definition of payoff for is Nightmare's Thirst, which is the removal spell, the 1 mana instant. And it gives a creature -X for how much life you've gained this turn. And then you also gain 1 life off of it. So if you can manage to combine, a couple of spells or another life gain spell, you can get it to actually kill a creature. So it's a nice little thing, but it's not really the type of card that you go for. You want these repeatable effects. Like, to me, Regal Bloodlord's the best one, and then Pridemate, then Epicure, and then Nightmare's Thirst. But when you really look at this, Luis, you're like, okay, sweet, this life gain deck, there's actually not that much to gain from it. And the 2 best ones are both uncommon. So it's actually pretty hard to find the payoffs. Where it's relatively easy is, that list for the one-time and repeat enablers is quite long.
So yeah, where this deck kind of ends up is not as heavily themed as you might think, but it is just a consistently great deck because you're very frequently just playing all good cards like Skymarch Bloodletter and Lich's Caress, and just gaining the life here and there, and then getting the payoff of something like Ajani's Pridemate or Regal Bloodlord. Regal Bloodlord is certainly the best one. The Fountain of Renewal, also very good in this deck. This is the 1 mana artifact that you gain a life during your
yeah. Good point. Oh, yeah. I should have put that in the repeat, although that's an uncommon at least. But still, that card's great. That card's awesome in this deck. Yeah, for sure.
So the biggest way you end up here is when you get a Regal Bloodlord third pick or something along those lines, right? Like you start with a, like a luminous, let's say you start with Luminous Bonds and Starcrown Stag, and then you see a Regal Bloodlord, and it's like, yeah, I'm just going to go into black white. I'm going to pick up a couple incidental life gain cards, and I'm going to be a quote unquote black white life gain deck, but really you're just a black white mid range that gets value out of these things like Vampire Neonate or Regal Bloodlord. And it's still the headliner is that it's black white life gain, but you may only have 4 cards in your deck that care about this.
Right. It's more of a gravy archetype than like a bread and butter, right? Like it's not like your whole entire deck's around it. As far as the card types, this is a 17 land deck. It's a classic mid-range deck for limited. You're going to have your whatever 14 to 16 creatures. Combat tricks not really important in a deck like this. You can play one if you need a playable or whatever, but you don't prioritize them. And then one of the really big benefits that you get out of this deck that you mentioned, Luis, is you just get good removal, right? I mean, you get all the black removal, which is quite solid in this format, and then you get the Luminous Bonds, as well as Take Vengeance. Which are fine as well. And black-white tend to have good removal, and this M19 is no exception. So, you'll play basically all the removal you can get, and you're going to get pretty good removal as well. The cards that you should be valuing higher for this archetype, pretty straightforward. Vampire Neonate and Epicure of Blood are cards that in a say a black-green deck are pretty meh. You're like, whatever. But in this archetype, they're good. They pay you off for some of the things that you're going to be doing anyway, so you should pay attention to them. All right, next one, maybe the best deck. I've heard some people say it's the best deck. I've certainly had success with it. It's the red-white aggro deck. Yeah, it also has a token, kind of a sub-theme thing going on, or a go-wide sub-theme, if you will. Though it tends to not necessarily need that to be the focal point in order to be good. It's just a thing that you can do. But there are a few token makers, in the set that you can use to put multiple creatures on the battlefield for just one card, even at common. But there's not. This is kind of the crazy part. There are 4 mass pump effects at either common or uncommon in this set. There's Inspired Charge, Trumpet Blast, Angel of the Dawn, and really sick card, the gold card, Heroic Reinforcements, the one that gives you 2/1/1s, pumps your team, and they all. Oh my God, that card is nasty, man. It's weird when you get your hands on a card like that because it looks fine, but then you play it and you're like, damn, like that was mean. Like that was a lot of oomph that card just packed. And then you think, well, maybe I was just ahead or it was just a good spot. And then somebody does it to you and you're just like, no, that card's just awesome. Like it just has a lot of raw power to it,
Yeah, you look at it and you're like, well, it's 2/1/1s that both get +1/+1, so that's 4 damage. And maybe I'll have 2 more creatures in play, so this is responsible for like 6 damage. But it's actually a lot more than that, because all of a sudden your 2/2s can attack into their 3/3s. And your 3/3s get past their 3/3s. So instead of representing like 6 damage, this might represent 8 or 10, because all of a sudden it enables 2 creatures to attack that couldn't have attacked before. And it just adds up so nicely with everything this deck is trying to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of extra damage too. I mean, even if all you're doing is getting the 2 extra tokens through, that's 4 extra damage. And you might not think, oh, that's not that great. But boy, if you're an aggressive deck, 4 damage is a lot, right? I mean, that's a big chunk of their life total. And that's like not even your great case scenario. That's like if you were at parity. If you were even a little bit ahead, you're just slamming them. And the cool part about that card too, Heroic Reinforcements, is that it gives you a nice flexibility on planning out a game plan, because you'll often have it in your hand, but go, well, this isn't a good time to cast it. And then you kind of build up your mana and you go like creature plus Heroic Reinforcements, and your opponent's like, what the hell? Like, thought I was okay. Like I just snuck an attack with my flyer or whatever. And boom, all of a sudden the tables turned on them and they're dead. Key commons, Angel of the Dawn, definitely on the list. One of the best commons for the archetype, 3/3 flyer for 5, and it pumps your team and gives them vigilance by +1/+1. And boy, the effect it has when it hits the battlefield is very strong, and the fact that it sticks around as a very viable threat is really a 1-2 punch that's great in general and really good in this type of deck. Gallant Cavalry is the 3 and a white that gives you 2/2s with vigilance, and then I mentioned Inspired Charge. Pegasus Courser actually is responsible for getting in quite a bit of annoying damage, perhaps not quite as good as it was before, but still very strong. Starcrown Stag, now that's the Elmer of all Elmers there. That thing is basically a threat and a removal in the same card, and when you play it against most opponents, they're going to dramatically change the way that they play the game based on it, and it's just a common. That's really powerful. And then you get Goblin Instigator, which is the one in a red that gives you 2/1/1 goblins. And then I mentioned Trumpet Blast. But the interesting part about this deck is that there's not that many like actual token makers. I mentioned the Instigator and the Cavalry, but it's okay. They do a fine job. But the truth is that you can also just play a red-white kind of aggressive end of a mid-range deck with Boggart Brutes and combat tricks and burn spells and that kind of stuff anyway. Like, this deck doesn't always have to just have 12 creatures on the battlefield to be good. You can still just curve out, use a combat trick to get rid of their blocker, chip in some damage, attack with everything, play Inspired Charge. Like, these are all very viable strategies that are not, you don't need to go 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, exact curve. Like, you can play around much more in the mid-range if you'd like.
What this deck does really well is it wins games where your opponent looks like they've stabilized. And I've had this experience on both sides of this where, yeah, the deck can curve out, like you said. You play 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and let's say your opponent stops you and they're at like 10 life. Mm-hmm. You frequently have games where you then go something like Angel of the Dawn, throw away 2 creatures, but deal 4 damage to you. Now you're at 6, and I have a 3/3 flyer and kill you over the course of 2 turns with that.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Or the board gets stalled and you play a Pegasus Courser, and if they can't kill it, then all of a sudden you have 4 points attacking in the air of that plus a 3/3.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Or you just build up your board. They can't ever attack too much. If they ever start getting aggressive, you just go attack with everything Inspired Charge, and it punishes them pretty hard for overstepping. So the deck can play like a normal aggro deck while still curving out and then, putting the normal pressure on, but it has a lot of really good fallback plans between the go wide and the pump spells, the evasion. It just isn't sacrificing much in terms of power and still has a lot of these good comeback effects.
Right. And that is a very annoying combo when you're trying to stabilize against them, because you have to be afraid of all these different types of angles where like one of them is like a Boggart Brute where you're like, okay, I need to get double blockers. And then they're like Sure Strike and you're like, crap. But then, kind of going tall, if you will. And then the other one, of course, is the go wide that we mentioned. And it's hard to cover all those bases. Your bad matchup, by the way, is any black deck, because they have, multiple cards, but 2 cards in particular that really ruin your day. And number one is public enemy number 1 for the red-white deck, which is Plague Mare. That horse. Yeah, basically Plague Wind. It just wipes away too many of your creatures for comfort and can be extremely difficult to come back, because that can cripple your game plan if you are trying to do the Trumpet Blast type stuff. And then the other one that does a really good job too is Skeleton Archer, the 3/3 that pings something. Because the 3/3 is big enough to block a lot of your early game, and it usually will pick off like a 2-drop or something like that. Like an actual card of yours can die to Skeleton Archer. There's a few different 2/1s that they'll play. The one that we mentioned, that the guy that pumps the cavalry guy or whatever. Yeah, the master. And then, sometimes people play the Viashino that does 2 to you. Like these little cards.
Oh, yeah, they frequently play that.
Yeah, these cards just get picked off by the stupid archer, and then he's there to block too. So it's like really annoying if they can curve into an archer with any number of blockers. But like I said, Plague Mare is really what you hate. And then I guess the best matchups probably blue-green, just because they have a hard time like actually reaching out and killing your stuff. And as we mentioned, if you're able to just keep all of your stuff or roughly all of your stuff on the board, you have this very flexible game plan of either attacking early or just building up a board and then leveraging those mass pump spells. So blue-green is going to have a tough time dealing with that kind of stuff. I wanted your take on this, Luis. I'm not a big fan of Goblin Motivator, the 1/1 for 1 that can give haste to stuff, or Lava Axe very much. The 4 in a red does 5 damage at sorcery speed. But I have seen people play them in their deck, but I've actually had more success with the decks that are a little bit closer to mid-range end of the spectrum than all-out aggro, like than I just need to curve out. Where you come down on this? Because I'm not really hot on those cards. I tend to not play them.
So I think that Lava Axe is pretty bad. I don't think most of the versions of White Red really want it. Mm-hmm. But I am a pretty big fan of the Motivator. I think that Goblin Motivator can combine so nicely with Starcrown Stag or Pegasus Courser that I'm in for that.
But aren't these cards just fine on their own? Like, why do I need to burn an entire card for this 1/1 body? Like, what is the big edge that this is giving me, I guess, is what
the reason I like the Motivator is because when you have your Inspired Charge or Trumpet Blast turn, it is a real card. It still does that work.
I see. So you're leveraging the body and you don't view it as like throwing one away or whatever.
and you are speeding up your whole game plan by a turn when you start with a motivator. So I think it's good. I think that you want to play one motivator. Probably don't play two most of the time because they get really bad in multiples, but one motivator is quite strong.
Okay, I'll look into it. I'm not sure if I trust this. I just wonder if I'm just better off with another, mid-sized threat or something like that, because it's also just generally a very bad top deck, which is like, okay, like in aggro decks, you take that risk on, so it's not the end of the world, but it's like, I don't know, wouldn't I rather just have something a little. Like, for example, would I rather just have another Viashino guy in my deck?
It depends on your curve, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Okay. So I would okay. I would try out the motivator if you haven't really had good success with it.
Right. Card type breakdown: 16 to 17 lands. If you do have the motivator style, lower curve, you can cheat and go down to 16 lands in some of those builds, and then the ones where you're really trying to curve out into. Maybe if you have a few 5-drop creatures or whatever, you probably want to stick to 17. This tends to be fairly creature heavy, 14 to 16 creatures. This is a deck that wants combat tricks, so you will play them. I will frequently play 2 to 3 combat tricks, Mighty Leap and Sure Striker, kind of the go-tos for at common. I don't know if I'll ever understand Aegis of the Heavens, Luis, at uncommon and what that's for, but
I don't really know what this card is for now.
Yeah, and so I don't tend to run it. I think Mighty Leap's just better, which is awkward. And then removal, you're gonna play the removal you can get. The removal that can go to the face, of course, is great, like Lightning Strike, but doesn't need to be said that you're going to be playing a Lightning Strike anyway.
Yeah, I would run Lightning Strike.
You would? Okay, so controversial opinion. Cards you should be valuing higher: Goblin Instigator, Trumpet Blast, Active Treason came to mind. Maybe the Motivator. Like, this is the only deck for it, right? Or do you play it in red?
I do not like Motivator in red green, okay. Because I feel like red green, even when it's like quote unquote aggressive, you still end up with trying to stabilize the board and then win with your bigger creatures enough of the time that Motivator just does nothing when you're on defense.
Okay, yeah, really nothing. And you're setting yourself up to be on defense in some of those decks. Before we move on to blue-white artifacts, do you think this is the best deck, or do you have this on your short list?
I think red-white's the overall best deck, yeah. It's certainly the best aggro deck. That's not even close. But in general, I think a good red-white deck is just better than
I think it's the
else.
only aggro deck. What else have I?
Yeah, I suppose there's not. I mean, I think like blue red can like pretend to be aggressive sometimes, but it's still just like flyers plus removal is not exactly aggro, and blue white has some of that too. But yeah, red white's the only like curve out aggressive deck I can really think of.
All right, let's look at blue white artifacts. Put that in air quotes. Basically, it's some combination of a traditional blue white flyers deck, but with random payoffs for artifacts, unless you choose to go all in on the artifacts sub theme, which you can do, though it comes together less often. Some of the key commons are Aviation Pioneer, 1/2 that gives you a 1/1 Thopter for 2 and a blue. Scholar of Stars, a 3/2 for 3 and a blue that draws a card if you control an artifact when it ATBs. Gearsmith Guardian, 5 mana, 3/5, but it gets +2/+0 if you have a blue creature. And then our good old friend Sky Scanner, 3 mana, 1/1 flyer cantrip, so it draws a card when it enters the battlefield. Your payoff cards, interestingly on this as well, and I think this is kind of the sub-theme that you'll see from M19, is that these are not fully fleshed out, fully supported archetypes. They're just random payoffs that you get. Sometimes are Ether Shield Artificer, yep. Which is 3 and a white, 3/3. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can have target artifact creature get what, +2 plus something and indestructible?
+2 +2. Yeah. +2/+2.
Yeah, until end of turn.
I don't know why you need the 2 toughness if you're indestructible, right. But here we are.
And then Aerial Engineer, which is 2 blue white for a 2/4. But if you control an artifact, it gets +2/+0 and has flying. So it becomes like kind of a yawn, and it turns into like a dragon. So that's kind of sweet. And then the Scholar of Stars that I mentioned a minute ago. That's kind of it. At the common level, it's like at common and uncommon level, there's really not that much by way of payoffs, but these are pretty good. So this is kind of another not fully supported archetype. There's just not that many payoffs to go all in on the artifact side of things. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but And also, you know, the real problem here being that if you do decide to do that, you often have to run some pretty unexciting artifacts to justify the payoffs. But if you don't find the payoffs, then you're running some pretty bad cards overall. And all of a sudden, you know, you're like turn 2, field creeper, go. And you really feel pretty bad about yourself if you find yourself in that situation. Just not a whole lot here for this deck. Now, I have had a couple versions where I did feel like I was full on this type, but to be honest, I just got lucky. Like I just opened up some of the uncommons. I had 2 of the artificers and 1 of the 2/4, and I'm like, okay, this is good. And then the Scholar of Stars are generally pretty easy to pick up. So I picked up a bunch of those and just jammed basically every artifact I could find. It was a pretty extreme deck for M19, but it was great. It felt awesome. It's just that like I can't really repeat it because you got to get fortunate and get those payoff uncommons, you know?
I mean, these what you're describing is kind of why the core sets tend not to hold our attention in quite the same manner as a normal expansion. Because yeah, this deck does exist, and sometimes you will get a deck with like 3 solid payoffs and like 5 or 6 artifacts, and it'll be pretty good. But sometimes you're just going to end up with like 2 payoffs and 4 artifacts, and you don't really feel like you drafted an artifact deck because you didn't. You drafted a deck that has a couple artifacts. And for the most part, I think that this deck is just like a blue-white Flyers deck. And then if you pick up enough things that care about artifacts, yeah, you do prioritize Field Creeper and Explosive Apparatus and whatnot. You know, sometimes Manolith does the trick for you. So I think that in general, you should be on the lookout here, but it's more of an opportunistic thing than I'm going to draft blue-white, so therefore I'm artifacts. It's more like I'm drafting blue-white. Some of the time I'll be artifacts. Right.
And then the other time it ends up playing roughly like a blue-white Flyers deck where you're playing Snapping Drake and the card that we opened up in our Crack-a-Pack as well, you know, 2/2 Flyers and 3/2 Flyers, and then just trying to clog up the ground. Yeah. So, and that's fine. I mean, it's a strategy that is playable in this set, though it's not exceptional. Like you don't have these great tools for that. It's just like, no, they're here. Like you have some ways to slow down creatures on the ground, and you know, you've got your Wall of Mist or whatever in your Flyer, so you can do it. I mean, I did have the fully committed deck in this, and you know, I got lucky, but I also had scenarios where like I played Skyscanner on turn 3, drew a card, then played Scholar of Stars on turn 4, drew a card. Like I'm actually developing my board and just never running out of gas in hand. And that does feel pretty good. It kind of puts a lot of pressure on Scholar of Stars because that's a card you can get the most easily. And I found that if you are on the all-in strategy, you're probably going to want like 6 or more artifacts or cards that make artifacts in your deck. And that one I had 7. And that felt fine to me. But you do need to get, like, you need to jam. You know, like you said, the Field Creeper or whatever. Sometimes this needs to get in there. 17 lands, 14 to 16 creatures like normal. I would not play combat tricks in this deck, generally speaking, but I would, again, make sure I have 6+ artifacts, I would guess, if I'm in the all artifact version, and concentrate, just like we talked about for Black-White, on the payoffs. That's what it's all about. If you get the good payoffs, then you can fill in the blanks and you will get there. But that's the hard part, is that you just don't know if you're ever going to get the payoffs or not. So you often have to hedge during the draft. And it's probably better, once again, to kind of view this as a little bit of a gravy type thing where you're like, well, I'll draw a card occasionally off of my 4-drop. Cards you should
M19 is all gravy to me.
It is, yeah, it really is. Cards you should be valued higher for this archetype: Gearsmith Guardian, the sort of reverse payoff where it checks to see if you have a blue creature for some reason. Card's actually like pretty darn good. Like that one can go into many different decks because it's not an artifact, based card. It's a blue creature based card. So if you're blue, you're probably going to have that. And I got to tell you, man, 5/5 for 5 is kind of overperforming for me.
Yeah, this card's one of the really nice additions to the deck because you're not really paying a cost by playing this. Mm-hmm. When you put Explosive Apparatus and Field Creeper in your deck, or Manolith in your 2-color deck, you are paying a cost because you would normally not put those cards in your deck. But yeah, because you've got some synergies, you're going to play them. The Gearsmith Guardian is just a card that you would play if you have 7 or 8 blue creatures, 6 blue creatures. And so therefore it's kind of like a free artifact in that respect.
Okay. And then, of course, you should keep your eye out for like Aviation Pioneer and Sky Scanner and stuff, because those can.
Yeah, but everyone loves the Sky Scanner.
Yeah, Sky Scanner is just dope. But Aviation Pioneer is kind of cool because it's like the one card that turns on the Gearsmith Guardian and your cares about artifact stuff.
Yeah.
So, multifaceted.
Also good to skilled animator, make a 5/5 flyer.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. There's another payoff, by the way, of some sorts. And I like that card, by the way. Next deck is blue-red spells. Have you drafted blue-red spells much?
Yeah, so I like blue-red spells a fair amount. And so kind of what this deck is trying to do is use the payoffs for playing a lot of spells, like Enigma Drake being the biggest one, Salvager of Secrets, to some degree the Aven Wind Mage. And there's just a lot of spells in blue and red, and you kind of end up with this largely control-ish deck. This deck hasn't been particularly aggressive. I think it doesn't end up being very good unless you get Enigma Drake, basically, which ends up making the deck not something you can rely on, because, black-white life gain, if you get Regal Bloodlord, deck's great. If you don't get Regal Bloodlord, you still have like a solid black-white mid-range deck. Blue-red spells, if you don't get Enigma Drake, you're kind of spinning your wheels with divinations and, and Tormenting Voice and Uncomfortable Chill and not really getting anywhere.
Right.
So
yeah, I actually think it's a fundamental problem with the archetype, because the more that you play these cantrips and these cards that sort of replace themselves, the worse your land to spell ratio gets in your actual library. And what that means is if the further the game goes, the more likely you are to just flood out. So it means that the payoffs have to be really good, because you're kind of fundamentally setting yourself up to not have this great, the more you do this, the more times that you're like crash through, and stocking up your graveyard with instants and sorceries, you're actually, screwing yourself over for later. And then what I've found is, I agree with you about the Enigma Drake, but what happens when they just kill it?
So I think that the way to construct this deck is more a blue-red control deck, because I think Essence Scatter, Cancel, and Bone Dash, the counterspells, are all really well positioned. That's actually one of the things I like about this deck, is that this format is slow enough, unless you play against red or white, where you end up with a lot of good counterspells. You can also, you end up with some decent red removal in the form of like Shock and Electrify. And, being able to handle a lot of your opponent's threats and then get card advantage off Divination and Salvager of Secrets and finish the game with maybe a rare that you end up having, or Enigma Drake or what have you. The problem comes when this deck doesn't have a good finisher, because, like you said, you spend a lot of time not doing that much. So you need a way to close out the game at the end of it, because one of the things that you've noted here is if you play too many cantrips, your mana ratio becomes really bad. Because let's say you put 2 Crash Through and anticipate 2 Divinations in your deck, you end up, I think, flooding out, because you really only have 20 spells in your deck if you're playing 17 land. The Divination maybe counts as a double spell, but like Crash Through and Anticipate, those are 1-for-1s, and often you're going to end up in a spot where you actually have 20 spells and 17 lands in your deck. You don't have 23 spells, because a couple of them just kind of filter. And Anticipate sure is probably going to hit a spell, so maybe that one doesn't count. But all the 1-for-1 cantrips, your Sky Scanners, all that sort of nonsense just ends up drawing you a card, and cycling over and over again does leave you flooded out most of the time.
Yeah. So to me, it's just really tough, because it puts so much pressure on the payoffs, and the payoffs are pretty good. Like you mentioned, Enigma Drake. There's also like Salvager of Secrets in this deck as a card that you can use to, sort of continue that chain. But sometimes it just does that. You're like, oh, I get my Anticipate back. It's like, all right, well, where are we going with this? And where we're going with is usually Enigma Drake. Card type breakdown. I try, like you're talking about it more as a control deck, so maybe you have a different take, but I've been trying to put 16 lands in the deck, just because I do plan on playing 1 and 2 mana cards that can replace themselves. And again, we talk about the mana thing. I think that makes me more likely to hit my land drops. Am I wrong in that? Is that an incorrect thing to do?
Well, I would tend to play 17 land, because you want as many divinations as you can get your hands on. I like the divinations a lot more than the cantrips. I don't play it as like, let's race to get 5 spells in my graveyard. I play it as, let's combine Divination, Essence Scatter, Shock, Electrify, and just end up, Salvager of Secrets, and end up just valuing your opponent out. And, you do happen to finish the game with a Enigma Drake, or maybe you open like a Laughless or Gin of Wishes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't play it as a like Aven Windmage prowess. Let's play 3 spells in the same turn kind of deck. I have found that to be fairly ineffective.
Okay, well, that probably explains why I'm not like a huge fan of the archetype.
Yeah, I think the more focused deck that you're talking about just doesn't exist in this format for the most part, which is unfortunate because those decks are pretty fun. But I don't think that it ends up being there most of the time.
Yeah, well, as somebody who has tried it, I can confirm that it is not very good. And there's not a lot of support for it. This is just the time when I got like 2 Enigma Drakes and a couple of those flyers or whatever. And I thought, well, we'll give it a shot, but it's not great. And then, you're going to end up running, 2 to 4 cantrips in this deck, and then even 2 to 3 draw spells. And you do kind of want to lean yourself over towards the sorcery and instant end of things if you can. But you'll do whatever you can do. Enigma Drake is a primary payoff, and then we mentioned Salvager of Secrets as the other card that you should be valuing higher for this archetype. And then you said Divination. I think that, Divination is a card you'll play in some decks, but this one really wants it more so than normal. Next archetype up is the red-green ramp deck. And then it sort of dovetails with the power 4 or greater build around cards, those are both red green as well.
Yeah, those are, I think, a little bit lighter because you're talking about a rare and an uncommon, but they do Sarkhan's Unsealing, Colossal Majesty. They do impact how you build your deck. In fact, Sarkhan's Unsealing I think is just a bomb. But
I do too.
But for the most part, you're talking about kind of a classic ramp deck. You've got Druid of the Cowl and Elvish Rejuvenator as ramp cards, and then you have, as well as the Draconic Disciple, the red-green gold card, the 2/2. Mm-hmm. And then you have just heavy hitters. You have Bristling Boars and Colossal Dreadmaws, and you're if you're lucky, a Palaka Worm, and you're trying Gaspark Twins. You're trying to finish the game with your large red creature or large green creatures with Shock and Electrify as ways to make it so your opponent doesn't kill you before you get those in play.
Mm-hmm. And then, but with the other version, you actually like if you happen to open Sarkhan's Unsealing, right, mm-hmm. which is the card that lets you do 4 damage to anywhere when you cast a creature with power 4 or greater, or is it when it ETBs? I actually don't remember, but either way,
it's when you cast. So I ran into this because I had a Gearsmith in my blue-red Sarkhan's Unsealing deck, and it did not. It doesn't. I was reading the 2 cards. I was like, darn, because it's a 3/5 when you cast it. It's 5/5 in play, but that doesn't trigger the Unsealing.
Oh, that's annoying. Yeah. So there's that, and then the and that thing, and then if you cast a 7-drop, you get to do 4 damage to like basically everything on your opponent's side of the board, which is complete crusher. And then we are also talking about Colossal Majesty, which at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you get to draw a card. And both of these are very good payoffs for that type of strategy. And what it does is, if you get them early, it means you do need to pay extra attention to get as many creatures with power 4 or greater, basically, as you can get. So cards like Onaki Ogre, the 2 and a red 4/2, that guy becomes much better in this deck than it would be in any other deck. And then even mediocre cards like Thornhide Wolves start to go up a little bit. Havoc Devils, definitely becomes the clear pick over the Haste 3/3. Which I kind of like it better anyway, but even then it becomes not remotely close. Cards like Rock's Oracle can do a good job of just sort of keeping the ball rolling while still casting a 4-powered creature. And then Bristling Boar, which we mentioned as well, the 4/3 for 3 and a green that you can't double block. That guy also, goes up. And these are cards that you almost have to prioritize them. Like if you end up with not enough, you are really can't run the enchantment. So I tend to go like all in when I get
Sarkhan's Unsealing is a deck in and of itself, and any creature with 4 power is playable once you have Sarkhan's Unsealing. And you should
and you're not giving it that much anyway.
No.
Right? You're
Onaki Ogre and Havoc Devils and Rock's Oracle might not be the best creatures in the world, but you're not really paying a huge cost by running them. And Thornhide Wolves and Bristling Boar are just great anyway. So yeah, I think that there's nothing wrong.
Thornhide Wolves just great has been called.
Oh yeah, I think that card's really good in this format. I mean,
really? I think it's
look.
fun.
I'm not saying take it over Shock or Luminous Bonds or or anything like that, but I would never look twice. If you showed me a deck that had 2 Thornhide Wolves, I wouldn't think anything of it. If you showed me a deck with 2 Onaki Ogres, I'd be like, okay, where's the Sarkhan's Unsealing?
Yeah, for sure.
It's more what I mean. You don't need to justify.
I agree. So. Yeah, that makes sense. And by the way, this is the sweet spot, right? Because we talk about build arounds a lot on the show, and there's a couple of different types, and this is the type you want to be in. This is the one that lets you free roll, the gravy build around, right? Where you can say, if I handed you this deck and I took Sarkon, let's say I had 2 cards missing. I took Sarkon's Unsealing and what's it called? Colossal Majesty, and I took it out. Right. And I just handed you the deck at a GP and said, what do you think? And you flip through it and you'd be like, okay, you've got some high powered stuff and a couple of ramp cards. Like, it seems fine is probably what you would say. Right. Where if I showed you a deck that was like trying to be all in on like artifacts or something like that, and I took the artifacts out, you would be like, your deck's terrible. Like, you're playing all these cards that don't do anything because you're not supporting them with the artifacts that they need to be good. Like, if I was like, check it out, I made a Scholar of Stars, deck, and you're like, but you don't have any artifacts, right? I would be like, well, sorry, I screwed up or whatever. But the point is that there's decks that require you to really commit. And if you don't draw the build around card, your deck is way worse than it would normally be. And then there's decks like this one, where if you draw the card, your deck is over the top insane. Like, if you draw your Sarkon's Unsealing, your deck is just absurd. And if you don't, you're still playing Magic. You're still playing cards that have power and toughness and can attack and block and have viable ways to win the game. And that's really a sweet spot, because boy, getting free rolled cards this powerful is really great. And even though you're giving up a little bit to have them, like playing the Onaki Ogres over whatever 3/3s or something like that, it's not that much. And the payoff is absolutely worth it. And man, that card is good. Dude, when I first drafted it, I didn't realize it could go upstairs. And I punted really bad. Oh. Like, I played it and I killed my opponent's creature. They were at 8, but I could actually cast 2 4-powered creatures that turn. And I'm just like,
you could have just nugged them.
I could have just killed, like, I could have just ended the game literally on the spot, and I like controlled their board or whatever. And it's just like, wow, like, this card's already so insane. And then also, the first time somebody played it against me, I thought, oh, this can't be that great. And then they play their next creature and it wasn't 4-powered, and I'm just like, ha ha ha, and I had this huge board state, and then they played the stupid Hellion, the 7/3, and I'm like, I had F6 or whatever, and my board just disappeared, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. Like, I just straight up lost a game I was like significantly ahead in because of it. So, and I think that just off the top of my head, it's just that and the Gaspark twins, right, that can actually, I guess, Gigantosaurus, but
Palaka Worm.
Oh, Palaka Worm, right. But
Palaka.
Oh, man, that card's just great on its own, too. One of the things that you should keep in mind with this deck is that you can get some removal, right? You get your normal removal thing. But one of the ways that you can lose is by losing to flyers, if they can sort of keep you off balance for a while. So just keep your eye out for Giant Spider and Plummet, either in the board or, if you want to main deck a Spider. I guess you can main deck a Plummet, though I haven't really been doing that. But you want access to those cards when you can. 17
yeah,
lands.
I actually don't,
go ahead.
I don't mind main decking Plummet in this deck.
Okay, there you go.
Like, if you're short on removal and or spiders, then it's fine to hedge a bit, because worst comes to worst, you take out a Sky Scanner. I mean, that's not particularly good.
That's pretty bad to have to take out a Sky Scanner, man. Like, I don't know if I have it in me to. 17 lands, 15 to 18 creatures. I don't tend to play combat tricks in this deck. Generally speaking, I'm leaning on the power level of my creatures themselves, and I'm playing these ramp spells and stuff, so you run out of room pretty quickly. Play the build around enchantments if you can get them. I would play as many Sarkon's Unsealings as I could get, basic, in a reasonable circumstance. And then, would I play 2 Colossal Majesty? I guess if I had the right build, I would. I wouldn't play 3, though. And then the ramp spells, you're going to play 1 to 2 of those. And then
playing 3 Colossal Majesty is just asking for trouble.
Yeah, I think so too. Although I did have a situation where I did have 2 Sarkon's Unsealings, and in pack 3, I got past another one. And the problem was that there was also a Thornhide Wolves in the pack. And I think I had maybe 5 4-powered creatures at the time, but I really wanted to get up to, 7 or 8 to power up my other 2 Sarkon's Unsealing.
Yeah.
So I took the Thornhide Wolves instead. I also thought I might wheel it, which I didn't end up doing. But would you do that too?
That sounds right.
Okay. Yeah, because you got to be able to support them, and I thought it'd be too greedy. Okay, one more archetype to go over, and it's one that's really straightforward, but quite sweet. It's blue black control.
I really like it.
Me too, and I've had success with it as well. Actually, I'll save that for later. I've got a question about a specific card for you. But this is a classic control deck. It's got defensive creatures, removal spells, card draw, and finishers. I mean, it's just kind of everything that you want to do. If you're in limited. Essence Scatter is one of the key commons. I feel like this is the best Essence Scatter set we've had.
Oh yeah, the counterspell. It's the best cancel set we've had.
Definitely.
Like Essence Scatter is always like playable, right? Even in M19, which was like triple M19 really fast, Essence Scatter was still a playable card. You would put it in all your blue decks, but it wasn't great because the format was really fast and all that. Here, Essence Scatter is great, but actually cancels solidly playable, and that's something that comes around very, very rarely. So it's pretty cool to see that happen. I don't remember cancel ever being this good.
Right. And Essence Scatter is just like it's my Doomblade now somehow. Salvager of Secrets is a card that you want in the blue-black control deck because you are going to be playing card draw and removal spells that are great to buy back with it. Divination, that's one of the card draw spells. And then I mentioned briefly the removal, basically all the black removal spells you can get your hands on. Those are going to help you get there. Now, some notes on this archetype. Cheap interaction is important. Right. You do want to try to get it if you can get it. But, even cards like Disperse and stuff just not die to some nonsense early. But boy, Lich's Caress just sings in this deck. I mean, it might be the best common anyway. It's already really great.
Yeah. I think
so. I'm not trying to say that this is the spot where you play it and you don't play it in other spots. But my God, is it good in this deck, because you do sometimes stumble a little to take a turn to cast Divination or whatever. And this thing just lets you kill whatever you need and then get that life total padded so that you don't just die to the next attack or whatever. You can also lean on cards like Aviation Pioneer to help you stabilize against those early evasive threats or, Bogger.
I'm a big fan of Pioneer.
Yeah. And then where are you at on Dwindle?
I actually think Dwindle's fine. Okay. You would certainly much rather have the good like hard removal, but Dwindle still does make it so one of your opponent's creatures can't attack you, and the clause about it blocking and getting destroyed means that it's not even that big of a cost if you have to eventually start attacking.
Yeah. What were you going to say about the Aviation Pioneer? Did you have another point?
I was going to say I really like cards like this that are good early. They're good defensively early, right? Like if your red-white opponent plays a 2/1 and a 3-drop and you play this, you're usually pretty happy about that exchange, while still being relevant late. On turn 9, Aviation Pioneer still gives you a 1/1 Thopter that gets to attack them in the air.
Yeah.
So, and it's an artifact because this deck every now and then plays like, let's say you have an Aviation Pioneer, a Sky Scanner, and like one other artifact, and then all of a sudden now Scholar of Secrets or Scholar of Stars is looking decent as well.
Can we make our one other artifact be Arcane Encyclopedia just for me?
That's actually the one I was thinking of, but I didn't want to go too deep on it.
You didn't want to be too greedy. Yeah. I'm going to give you the green light.
Funnily enough, Arcane Encyclopedia is also really good against this deck. I have lost badly to like red-green when I was on a blue-black deck, and they played an Encyclopedia, maybe out of the board. I don't even know. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, all your removal spells and counter spells are great, but they're drawing 2 cards a turn. They're eventually going to kill you with Centaur Coursers and Bristling Boars because they have a never-ending stream of cards. So one of the disadvantages of playing a control deck is you are vulnerable to stuff like that.
Some of the big power comes in the form of uncommons for this deck. Arcane Encyclopedia is one that we just mentioned, but cards like Psychic Symbiont, which I love. Sift is a good way to just power through your library in the mid to late game. Exclusion Mage is a good way to stay alive early and have a blocker so that you can buy the time needed to start getting your cards from, again, Sift and Arcane Encyclopedia and stuff like that. Murder is just awesome. Plaguemare is an absolute premium in a card like this because the times when you do die are to those type of decks, the red-white decks that can either run you over before you can get your feet under you or can present enough disparate threats that you can't just simply kill each one of them individually, when they go wide, where Plaguemare just cleans up the board for you. And then you get, near bomb level uncommons like Vampire Sovereign. I just think that card is just freaking awesome, right? You just play it. It's huge. It blocks. It attacks well. It drains them. Siege Lino. Yes. Cards is not as great. Sleep. I have not been happy with or running Sleep in this deck.
Crap in this deck. Like like sleep is a good card in the right deck, but the right deck comes few and far between. We'll talk more about this because sleep is on our underrated, overrated, and properly rated cards. I'll let you guess which one it's going to be, but do not put sleep in your blue-black control decks.
Right. And then another card I want your take on, Luis, was Blood Divination. I have actually not been liking it in this deck. It's the 3 and a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you sack a creature, you draw 3 cards. The thing is, yes, there are creatures in black that I don't mind sacrificing, like the skeleton, the reassembling skeleton, or the doomed dissenter. Those are fine cards, A, to play in the deck, and B, to sacrifice to it. But what I've noticed is that I'm usually playing a relatively low creature count, 10 to 12 or so for this deck. And that the times when I have to sacrifice an actual creature is really painful. And so I've just been leaning on the non-blood version of Divination a lot harder.
Yes, I would not mix blood and divination, much like coffee. And I love divination. I love coffee. I don't want blood in either of those things. So, you don't want to spend an extra mana and be behind on board to draw an extra card. It's just not good. So don't put blood divination in your deck. I do like it as a sideboard card against Luminous Bonds. You get to use your opponent's removal against them. But yeah, for the most part, you should not be playing blood divination.
And then the one misconception I think that some people have about decks like this, I mentioned at the beginning for blue-black control, that you've got defensive creatures, removal, card draw, and finishers. I think that sometimes people think control deck and they think that you need a bomb, right? You need that one big finisher to just crush your opponent with, because maybe that's how old constructed decks looked, or maybe even old limited decks. But the truth is, you don't actually need that. You can get the job done a lot easier by just simply out-carding them through raw card advantage. You just draw more cards and you just overwhelm them with sheer resources in the late part of the game. Or, you can even have like a medium, like not a bomb finisher, of some huge level, but you could have like a Horizon. You
can have a Horizon Scholar. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we were both getting.
Yeah, and
yeah,
kills them.
If you have a Horizon Scholar, like a Gravedigger, and maybe one other like a Psychic Symbiont, I'll feel pretty good about being able to close out games, assuming I have like good removal, counter spells, and card draw, because this deck is really trying to just lock it down and blank all your opponent's cards before you finally kill them. This isn't like blue-red, because this deck has generally more removal and better card advantage. So you end up in a spot where it doesn't matter as much what you kill them with.
Right. Card type breakdown, 17, sometimes 18 lands, like if you've got an Arcane Encyclopedia.
Yeah. Do not mind 18 lands at all.
Yeah.
Because another thing you want to be able to do is play first if you have 2 or 3 divinations in your deck, being on the draw is a pretty big disadvantage, because when you divination turn 3 on the draw, you end up having to discard. So you want to be able to play first, but also not worry about hitting your 3rd land draw. So more card draw means you want to play more lands.
There you go. 10 to 12 creatures I mentioned. I do not play combat tricks in this deck effectively ever. And then, you want 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 card draw spells. I mean, it kind of depends on the mix that you have, but you do need to have ways to get ahead on cards. I mean, my favorite is the Arcane Encyclopedia, because, it goes with the game plan so well of stabilizing, and then you're just drawing an extra card every turn, and it can simply just, be responsible for drawing 5 extra cards over the course of a game. And it's just so tough to beat that. But Divination is the go-to, I think, for that.
I think Sift is also a really, really good alternative, like also an uncommon. But if you have 1 Sift and 2 divinations and a Gravedigger, like I think you're going to be pretty good on card advantage. Macabre Waltz is actually kind of nice in this deck. It's funny because normally a 10 creature Macabre Waltz deck doesn't sound very good, but when you have that much card draw, you just want the 1 Waltz to make sure you can close out the game.
Right, exactly. Cards you should be valuing higher for this archetype. I couldn't really think of anything specific. I put Nightmare's Thirst just because it is good to have any early interaction.
I would just play it without any other card draw against, if I needed
any life gains. Yeah. And then I also and then I put Rise from the Grave here as well, not because it's so great, but I don't hate it in this deck because you often do have, say, 2 to 3 forms of hard removal with another 1 to 2, soft removal. And your game plan is to kill all their stuff or to kill all their relevant stuff, so you can often find a spot to get a good Rise from the Grave. Again, it's not important, right? Like this isn't a key to this archetype or anything like that. But this
is the card that you need to value highly when you're in this.
Yeah, should we value higher as Lich's Caress?
Underrated Lich's Caress.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it for the archetypes. Let's get into the overrated, underrated, or properly rated here for M19. I've just picked a bunch of cards that I've heard people talking about or I have opinions on it.
Yeah, we'll just throw a couple on the list as well.
All right, so let's start with Make a Stand. That's a card that, man, I have gotten wrecked by that card before. It's the 2 and a white instant at uncommon. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. I never seem to play around it until I see it, and but it leaves me quite vulnerable during like big attack steps.
It's I think that this is probably correctly rated. I don't think that people are saying this card is crap or great, and it is neither of those things. Mm-hmm. But where I do like it is when your opponent plays around Inspire Charge, often Make a Stand really gets them because they're like, well, they could have Inspire Charge, so I'm going to put a 3-power creature on their 2 toughness creature, and that way I still kill their creature even through an Inspired Charge, and they do that a couple times, then Make a Stand just completely wrecks them. I think this card is good. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's definitely good enough to run, and it can overperform.
Okay, so properly rated for Make a Stand. Next one is Rustwing Falcon, 1 white for a 1/2 flyer. I got this one as overrated right now. I play against this card a lot, like way more than I thought I would. And every time I do, I'm like, oh, that's fine. Like I never look at that and go, I'm screwed, So I think this card it does fit into that category of like a Johnny's Welcome and Ghoul Color's Bell, which is sometimes when you play against this card, it's good news for you because it means your opponent is overvaluing this 1-drop that won't have a huge effect on the game. Sometimes that means you're actually in trouble because your opponent constructed such a low curve deck that it's actually right for them to play Rustwing Falcon. I know. I used to get scared when I saw it.
Well, yeah.
It's just enough times that people aren't leveraging it properly and I'm just like there's been multiple games where I'm playing a slower deck and they play the Rustwing Falcon and I have the option to kill it like multiple times and I just decline it. I'm just going to keep taking 1 from that thing basically perpetually. And eventually I'm going to start attacking you for 3 and then 5 and your Rustwing Falcon doesn't even block well. What is the deck that, is singing for a Rustwing Falcon? What does that even look like?
I think it's just like the really aggressive red-white deck that is hoping to have this in its opener, get 3 or 4 points in, and then eventually cast a Trumpet Blast or Inspired Charge and have this actually count in combat that turn.
Okay. Yeah.
I do think it's overrated.
So I have it as a little overrated. Yeah, I just don't think it should be in every white deck or even white aggressive deck. Starcrown Stag. Now,
I believe this card
love this card.
Is properly rated, and that rating is very high. Starcrown Stag is just a really easy way to lose a game, right? You think that your draw is pretty good and your opponent goes, Starcrown Stag, next turn kill your biggest creature, tap your second biggest creature, and then you take 5 off of their 2/2 plus Starcrown Stag, and you just, at that point, just so far behind that it's really hard to come back.
Also, Elmer's like much bigger than a dinosaur, so take that. Gearsmith Prodigy. Why have I ever seen this card on the battlefield? This is blue for a 1/2, and you get this great benefit of +1/+0 as long as you control an artifact. I feel like it's overrated just because I have actually played against people playing the card, and I don't
I think it's quite bad. So I think if I have not played against it yet, but if you've ever seen it in play on the opposing side, then probably overrated. Right. I just don't think blue decks aren't set up to take advantage of this card. It's not even what the like blue artifact aggressive deck wants.
That's right. All right. Patient Rebuilding.
This card is properly rated.
Properly
as a bomb.
Rated is awesome.
I mean, I actually tweeted out a bunch of question marks when I saw a 3rd pick pack 1 Patient Rebuilding in a draft earlier this week. Because it's just like, what led to this? I don't understand.
What? Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to say properly rated as amazing. All right. This next card I have to know because BDM has been texting me every other day about this stupid card. Psychic Corrosion, 2 and a blue, enchantment and uncommon. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent mills for 2.
Overrated.
That's what I think.
So I think that there are matchups where this card is awesome. I actually do like it in my sideboard, Because if you're blue-black control and, you only have a couple ways to finish the game, and then you play against another blue-black deck or a blue-red control deck, yeah, I'm snap bringing this card in and just Psychic Corrosioning them right out. But against an aggro deck, it's not going to decide the outcome of the game in any way, shape, or form. If you've stabilized to where this card can kill them,
it will decide the outcome of the game, just not the way you hope. Right? Yeah.
Right. If you stabilize to where this will kill them, then you've already won. And when at any point before that, this does absolutely nothing for you. So I think this card's overrated. I don't think it's particularly good.
Okay. What I think is that we're probably just at the time of the draft where BDM has decided that the normal strategies are behind him and he's going deep, and I'll probably be there joining him soon. Uncomfortable Chill.
I like this card. I like this card quite a bit. I don't think it's an amazing card. Yes, I do. I think this card's underrated.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's actually a single card discussion thread on the subreddit, the LRcast subreddit, which I posted on, where basically I think Uncomfortable Chill is relatively low opportunity cost to include in your deck. And when it works, it's a 2-for-1 or more, because sometimes you can win 2 combats, in which case it's a 3-for-1 because this draws a card. It also prevents a couple points of damage and draws you a card. And there's just not a huge cost to doing all that. Basically, it ranges from cycling and gaining a couple life, or just straight up cycling, like you just cast it end of turn, to being a 2 or a 3-for-1. And that's a really high end for something that does not have a very low end.
I tell you what, getting wrecked by Uncomfortable Chill feels real bad. And it has happened to me. I'm with you. A little underrated on that. All right. We talked about a minute ago. Sleep overrated?
I think it's overrated. So Sleep has been printed a bunch of times, right? And it's funny because Sleep will range from being great and a really good card, a really strong inclusion in a deck, a card that's very hard to beat, to being quite mediocre and overrated. And it's really hard to tell where it's going to land. I think here it has landed at overrated because there's just not that many good blue aggro decks. And so basically where you want Sleep is in a blue-green deck. I just don't think, I don't think that deck comes along all that often. And I just think that the risk of having Sleep when you're not able to press the aggression is just really big. And I don't think Sleep ends up being particularly good.
Yeah, this goes to a dynamic that we talk about on the podcast actually quite often about, how your brain has a really hard time differentiating in a reasonable way between the times when something did well versus the time when it did poorly. And what you'll often see in these situations is when somebody plays Sleep and wins the game on the spot, they go, holy crap, right? Or it won a game that they couldn't win otherwise. And that is, by the way, those are bonus points for Sleep. Those are the cases where it really shines. But there's also times where they're losing or where they're not doing well. And what they do is they cast Sleep, and it means that they don't take damage the next turn. So they figure that's fine. It did something. At least I didn't die. But the truth is that was a negative outcome for them, right? Casting the Sleep to just simply prevent their opponent from attacking for a turn is not a good, you would never play that card for that reason. And you're just basically tearing up a card where your opponent, gets to keep drawing cards and you're not, for that turn. And I think that people tend to sort of let Sleep off the hook during those situations, which leads us to this thing where you think of the big blowout turns and then you sort of discount the times when you cast it for a loss, and it leads to people overrating it a bit. That said, it does still have its home. I mean, the times when it does do it, there are no other cards that could win, and it does pack quite a punch in those situations. They're just more narrow, I think, than people think. We already talked about Blood Divination. What about Demon of Catastrophes?
I think this card's probably properly rated
as pretty darn good.
Yeah, as good.
Okay, because that's where I have it, but I'm not in love with the card. It's the 2 black 6/6 Flampler, but you have to sack a creature when you cast it. And I think it was maybe Ben Sack when he was on the show. He said something like, "What if this was an enchantment that you had to put on your creature, but it made it into a 6/6 with flying and trample?" For 4 mana, I'd be like, well, I'd play that, right? It's well known that I'm not a huge fan of auras in general, but when you push the power level high enough, I'm in, and I would super be in for that. So I guess it just means that I like this card,
Yeah, I think the card is really good. Just pick up some sky scanners.
All right, I've saw some chatter on Twitter about this. Is Gravedigger overrated?
I would be surprised if it were. I think, again, this is properly rated. It is very good.
Some people don't think it is. Some people think it's not well set up for M19.
I don't
block unfollow report.
No, I mean, I think that unless you're saying the card's unplayable, then I could see it not being the best it's ever been. But I think the card is fine.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's properly rated is quite strong. I've just seen some chatter that made me like, Inferno Hellion.
I actually don't know where I land on this card. I have generally, this is the 4-mana 7/3, and then with trample, and then when at the end of turn, if it attacks, shuffle it back into your deck, or attacked or blocked. I think that it is pretty good. I've seen it be effective while in play, but it's kind of interesting because it's hard for me to tell, because some of the times when it's bad, I guess it's pretty bad, but it seems pretty good to me. It just does enough damage that it's worth the card.
It's a hard card to evaluate for sure. We're going to say properly rated for Inferno Hellion. What about Declare Dominance? 3GG sorcery. Target creature gets +3/+3, and everything that can block it must do so.
Declare Dominance is good. This is
it's like super powerful, right?
Yeah, it's either like a straight up removal spell or even a 2-for-1 in like the middle to early part of the game. It's just, or I guess middle since it's turn 5, or late in the game, it can just force all your other attackers through while taking out some of their creatures, so they probably can't even attack you back.
Properly rated for Declare Dominance?
I think so. I think everyone likes it.
What about this one's interesting? What about Hungering Hydra? I think this one's a little bit overrated.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a little overrated. It's fine, but it's honestly not that much better than Colossal Dreadmaw. Like,
right. It might not even be better. Like,
well, I think
it doesn't have trample. Like, the lack of trample is like a major downside because you're never getting an efficient body here.
I think it is. I think it is good. I think the fact that you can cast it as a 4-mana 3/3 or a 5-mana 4/4 or a 6-mana 5/5 or a 10-mana 9/9 makes it, the flexibility probably does make it better than Dreadmaw, but this isn't a bomb. Like, I would take a removal spell over this.
Yeah, I agree. Overrated by a little by Hydra. Let's see. Oh, what about okay, so this is one that we had a lot of discussion on. What about Chaos Wand?
So this card
people like it. You like it, right?
Well, so here's where I stand on Chaos Wand. I think that in draft, it's a card. So I think overall this card, well, I think you underrated it in the set review, but as a whole, I think the card is probably properly rated. People seem to get it, which is it's either a sideboard card or marginal playable in draft and a bomb in sealed. And I think that's I think that's a fine place to be. Like if you're a slow deck and you have extra slots, sure, a Chaos Wand could make the cut. But it's also a great sideboard card. If you play against like blue-red or blue-black, all of a sudden Chaos Wand's just going to be one of the best cards you could imagine. Against green-white or maybe a spell-light version of like red-green or something, it's just not going to be good at all. So that's why I do tend to sideboard it. And against red-white aggro, it's terrible. You just don't have enough time to do all this. But in sealed, everyone plays all the removal spells, so it's a bomb there. So I think Chaos Wand is probably properly rated, though being kind of crazy.
All right, here's what. Where are you at on Meteor Golem, the 7-mana 3/3 that destroys a non-land permanent? I love this card, but am I overrating it a little at this point?
I think it's quite good. You might be overrating it if you're wanting to take it over like Lich's Caress or Electrify early, because I don't think it's better than those cards.
I think I would take it over Electrify, but not Lich's Caress.
Yeah, that might be about right. I mean, Electrify is good, but the Meteor Golem is a very nice ramp payoff. So,
okay, so I can still like it and be sleep well.
I will give you permission to like Meteor Golem.
Okay, now this I have one last one, but we need some work out of this card because this is one of the more difficult cards to evaluate we've had in a while. It's Transmogrifying Wand, the Sheepmaker, 3-mana artifact. Enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters. You can pay 1, tap it, and remove a charge counter at sorcery speed to destroy target creature, turning it into a 2/4 white ox token. So you get to kill 3 things, but they get creatures out of it, but their mediocre creatures is just 2/4 vanilla. But you're the one who had to spend the card. Like, you're never like up a card here. You're just downgrading 3 creatures over the course of the game.
Transmogrifying One is great. You don't want it in an aggressive
It's
deck.
really good, right?
Yeah, it's fantastic. You don't want it in an aggressive deck, but in a control deck, it's just such a good removal spell. And if you transmogrify your own like Doom Dissenter, you get a 2/2 and a 2/4, and then you can turn 2 of their things into 2/4s, and you end up in a spot that's a stalemate, but you killed 2 of their great creatures. So I think,
or at least downgraded.
Yes, it turned them into
like, aren't you supposed to lose? Yeah, like here, like zooming out from like a theory, in a theory perspective, shouldn't this card be bad? Like, aren't you supposed to say, okay, I play a wand, I downgrade 3 of your creatures, but then I still have to face down these 3 creatures, but I'm down a card because I had to play the wand. So therefore, like in a very tight vacuum here, I will end up losing anyway.
It just depends on how big the downgrades are. And the good thing about 2/4s is they don't really make much headway. It's really hard to use them to break through. It's pretty easy to keep a bunch of 2/4s at bay. So this in practice plays much more like, kill three opposing creatures than it does.
It feels like
it does anything else. Like I think transmogrifying one is very good.
Okay, and what if they were 3/3s?
This card would be much worse. A 3/3 is a real threat.
Okay, so the difference between 2 power and 3 power is really the clutch here.
You are often going to use wand once on your own creature, twice on their creature, at which point it's much more of a stalemate, whereas if they were 3/3s, they'd just be bashing.
Right, okay, because they could actually trade off. So the fact that it's 2 power and also the fact that they're not the same toughness means, or not the same or lower toughness means that it's better. Yeah, because, I mean, I've had, their oxen run into my Omen Speaker, and it's like, I'm doing it, right? Like, I feel like I just killed your creature straight up. Okay, that was fun. That is going to do it, though, for the M19 Archetypes deep dive. M19's been pretty fun. It's been a tough one to follow up Dominaria, which has been kind of a, one of the best limited sets since I've been playing, I think. But that said, M19 actually is okay. It's a little blah, right? Like I'm not like excited about it, but at the same time, I've drafted it through this whole time, and I'm still like, yeah, this is still Magic and still drafting, and I don't really have any big complaints, so I'll just keep doing it. It doesn't have that big draw to it, but they managed to at least not just like, have like a super lame set to follow up Dominaria, which would have been really disappointing because you would have noticed the difference, I think. So I'll keep playing it until they send me something else. But if the cube came out, I probably wouldn't complain either. And I also have a prediction for M19 that once it's gone, I will not remember anything about it.
Yes. I
think in 2 years. Yeah, if you sent me a text in 2 years and say, what was your favorite deck from M19? I would say, I don't know a single card from M19. Like, I would just totally not remember what was going on, which is fine. There's a lot of sets that I really liked that fit that description. So maybe it's not even that bad. All right, so that's going to do it for this one. I want to mention our sponsor channel, fireball.com. Sell your cards back to them. My goodness, I've been telling you to do this for years, and you should super do it. It's how it works because Magic's an expensive hobby. It just is. And if you want to try to reduce that cost, this is the way to do it. You take your draft rares from your local store or from drafting with your friends, you package them up and you send them to CFB, and they give you 30% trade-in bonus so you can get more sealed packs or supplies, whatever it is that you want, you're going to be able to find it there. And then you can keep playing more and for longer. And that's really kind of the name of the game because, of course, we recognize that Magic's not cheap. It is an expensive hobby. And this is one of the best ways that you have to chip into that. And, of course, I mentioned it before, but while you're over at CFB, the content, boy, the leaders in the field, and they've got some awesome stuff on the front page of the website. Also, you can find me on social media. I'm Marshall_LR or Luis at LSV. We're pretty much everywhere. And you can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. We'll be back next week with more. We'll see you then.
So one thing that I did not mention last week that has to do with a key part of our preparation for the Pro Tour was negotiating with Benes. So
what? He's on your team, though, right?
Okay, so here, let me set the stage. The Pro Tour was the same weekend as Gen Con. And Gen Con had an event that was highly desirable. That was the beta draft, the same event that happened in Vegas that myself, Ben, and Martin were lucky enough to play in. So the beta draft happened Sunday. Qualifiers for the beta draft start on Thursday. Note that the Pro Tour in Minneapolis starts on Friday. See, you're able to do the math. So did Ben. And Ben S pointed, hey, I'm thinking about, he posted on our team forum, hey, I'm thinking about going to Gen Con to play in beta draft qualifiers on Thursday. Does anyone else want to go? I immediately posted like, Ben, what exactly are you talking about? What would the details be? He's like, well, there's a beta draft qualifier at 3 p.m. on Thursday and at 7 p.m. on Thursday. And I figured I'd play the 3 p.m. and if I was still in it, finish that one out. But if I was doing badly, I would join the 7 p.m. I'm like, well, how are you getting back? No,
that's not what you meant.
No, this isn't private messaging. This is in our team forum. And then Ben's like, and then I was like, well, how are you getting back? And he's like, well, I figured I would fly back Friday morning. You know, the morning of the Pro Tour that starts at 9 a.m.
Of the Pro Tour? By the way, this Pro Tour was the biggest, monetarily speaking, Pro Tour ever by a lot.
Yeah, $850,000 in prizes. A normal Pro Tour is $250,000 in prizes. Mm-hmm. So this goes on, and you know, I think the newer members of the team, the people who haven't been exposed to Ben S yet, probably thought Ben was kidding. They probably thought, like, yeah, Ben's just messing around. I know he wants to play in the beta draft qualifiers, but yeah, obviously this is ridiculous. Martin Juza did not think that. Martin was on Ben's team because Ben's on my team for the team series, but in terms of the teams we were actually playing with, the 3-person teams, it was myself, Paulo, and Sigrist, and Martin, Ben, and Josh Utter-Layton. No, you might recognize that team as the team that made the finals of the Pro Tour.
Yeah, that one.
Martin messages me later that day, like, hey, can you talk to Ben? I think he's going to go to Gen Con, and it's really stressing me out.
Oh, my God.
So I messaged Ben. I'm like, dude, you're not seriously going to Gen Con, are you? He's like, yeah, why wouldn't I? He's like, they're on Thursday. There's 1 million flights to Minneapolis from Indy on Friday morning. It's basically impossible to get screwed. And I'm just like, and he's like, plus, I don't sleep well at Pro Tours anyway. So even if I played a beta draft qualifier all night, it would be fine. I would just get on the flight the next morning and make it to the Pro Tour. I just take like a 7 a.m. flight because they're only like an hour apart. And it's just like,
and no sleep with no backup plan.
Yeah, and getting there an hour before the PT when you still have to like get to the airport and get a cab and like, and your teammates don't know if you're showing up. And I'm like, okay, well,
what could go wrong?
And Ben's trying to argue with me about like how unlikely it is that he would get screwed, about how many flights there were. If the first flight didn't work out, he would just hop on a different one. And I'm like, okay. Let me try a new tack. So I'm like, okay, Ben, you know that your teammates would be really angry if you do this and it would really stress them out and make them very unhappy. He's like, that is true. What you're saying is true. It's irrational, but it is true. They definitely would be angry. I'm like, okay. So finally, I'm like, okay, Ben, how about this? Gen Con's really expensive. To play in the qualifiers, you have to buy a badge. The badges are expensive. You also have to pay entry for the tournaments, and you have to find a hotel in Indy during Gen Con, which is really expensive. And you'd have to fly to Gen Con, then fly to Minneapolis. And Ben's response to this? You know, life's not all about expected value.
Really? He said that? You have that in writing?
And at that point, I knew there was just no getting through to Ben, because Ben is the number one person who's like, that's irrational. Why would you do it? And when I tried to trot out the like, that's irrational, he's like, well, life's not all about expected value. It's like,
oh my God.
Well, the conclusion of this story is that Ben doesn't go to Gen Con. His team does make the top 4, and we averted quite a funny but awkward situation. But I'll tell you what, teaming with Ben S is always a wild ride, and I think Martin and Josh were holding their breath that he would not be going to Gen Con even up until the day of the tournament.
Look, man, as long as you keep reporting back to us with the great stories, I'm happy to have you keep teaming with them.